Good morning. My name is Nini Ingersoll, and as a member of the Board of Trustees for Mainline Unitarian Church, I wish you a warm welcome. Aren't you all a sight for sore eyes? Are Cynthia and Robert Barker here today? Hello. Robert and Cynthia moved here from Massachusetts just before things closed down to COVID. They moved to be close to their son and his family. They have been attending services online and joined MLUC in August of 2020 without having ever attended a live service. Soon after getting involved with MLUC, Cynthia and Betsy Plume wound up on the same Zoom. They had known each other from childhood and had grown up in the same small town in Connecticut. What a small world. Today's their first service, and we'd like to give them a warm welcome. If you're visiting for the first time, an especially warm welcome to you. Together, we strive to nurture a loving community that supports us in our individual spiritual growth and empowers us to work for justice in the world. Through song, story, silence, and the spoken word, we open our minds and our hearts to a place of deeper understanding. We are here together. Some of you are here in this room. Some of you are communing from your home or vacation homes. Some of you may spend your Sunday mornings on a walk with a friend. Maybe you're a night out and check into the service later today or later this week. Every voice and every heart is welcome and enriches our community. One of the privileges of membership at MLUC is the ability to nominate a charitable organization to be considered as a recipient for offering outreach. If you have knowledge of a local charitable organization whose mission is consistent with UU principles, consider making a nomination. For more information about how organizations are selected and a nomination form, go to the MLUC website and select Justice, and then Offering Outreach. I have a quick word about our room environment this morning. You'll notice that the windows along the sides of the rooms are open, and fresh air is coming through them. Please leave them open. We're trying to ventilate the room enough so that everyone can feel safe, so that we can accommodate more people in coming weeks, and that we feel safe singing together during worship. Measurements we take this morning will help us relax these restrictions in the coming weeks. Thank you for keeping us all safe, Rich. So please join me as we remind ourselves of the power and the hope that we share as a community. Together, we transform lives through love, service, and our welcoming faith.
Good morning. My name is... I love hearing it back. It's odd when we're just recording for Jay. It's special, but disconcerting. I'm Chris Cavallari. I'm your worship associate for today. And obviously I'm super excited to be back in this room. And I was thinking about it, that like our mainline Unitarian church community broke into these pieces 15 months ago. We were all kind of disassembled in our virtual and remote spaces. And at a graduation yesterday, I heard a quote It's by Derek Walcott. Break a vase, and the love that reassembles the fragments is stronger than that love which took its symmetry for granted when it was whole. And I keep thinking about Rich reassembling us and our love pulling us all together. At Mainline, we support one another's learning by extending and receiving welcome, and we welcome you to be as fully present as possible, to be here with your doubts, fears and feelings, as well as your convictions, joys, and successes. But most important that draws me here is to be here with your wonder. And leading our inquiry today is Reverend Libby Smith. Libby, as those of you who have been here in this room before know, is a lifelong University Unitarian who grew up in York, Pennsylvania, and earned her Master's of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. Since then, Libby has served many congregations along the East Coast, and we're delighted to have her return back as our guest minister. Libby's service is entitled The New Normal and invites us to reflect on what we've learned and how we've grown and changed during the challenges of the past year, and how our joyful noise of reunion is not a return back and might instead be a journey forward. So now let us silence our cell phones and center ourselves for worship as we listen to the prelude, Morning Has Broken, performed by Dr. Vincent Gregg.
chalice lighting this morning is reading 437, Let Us Worship. The words are by Kenneth Patton.
Let us worship with our eyes and ears and fingertips.
Let us love the world through heart and mind and body.
We feed our eyes upon the mystery and revelation in the faces of our siblings.
We seek to know the wistfulness of the very young and the very old, the wistfulness of people in all times of life.
We seek to understand the shyness behind arrogance, the fear behind pride, the tenderness behind clumsy strength, the anguish behind cruelty.
All life flows into a great common life if we will only open our eyes to our companions.
Let us worship not in bowing down, not with closed eyes and stopped ears.
Let us worship with the opening of all the windows of our beings, with the full outstretching of our spirits.
Life comes with singing and laughter, with tears and confiding, with a rising wave too great to be held in the mind and heart and body to those who have fallen in love with life.
Let us worship and let us learn to love.
Let's enjoy an interlude from Vincent Craig, Adoration by Florence Price. I'm going to tell a story this morning, but I'm not going to invite the children to come up. There are two reasons for that. One is I'm not sure it's a great idea to move people around the room indiscriminately. But the other is that for the past 15 months, when I've told you a story or shared an activity, I've had to do it with this much of me. And today I'm going to use my whole body to tell the story. And so you may actually be able to see better from where you are than if I brought you up close. And besides, I have one child I'm going to bring up as a kind of a prop. And that might get a little messy. It's my child. So, one day, I had an idea. Where did it come from? Why is it here? I wondered, what do you do with an idea? At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed kind of strange and maybe fragile. I didn't know what to do with it. So I just walked away from it. I acted like it didn't belong to me. But it followed me. I worried what others would think. What would people say about my idea? I kept it to myself. I hid it away and didn't talk about it. I tried to act like everything was the same as before my idea ever showed up. But there was something magical about my idea. I had to admit, I felt better and happier when it was around. It wanted food. It wanted to play. Actually, it wanted a lot of attention. It grew bigger, and we became friends. I showed it to other people. Even though I was afraid of what they would say, I was afraid that if people saw it, they would laugh at it. I was afraid they would think it was silly, and many of them did. They said it was no good. Can you say that? No good. They said it was too weird. They said it was a waste of time. And that it would never become anything. And at first, I believed them. I actually thought about giving up on my idea. I almost listened to them, but then I realized, what do they really know? This is my idea, I thought. No one knows it like I do. It's okay if it's different and weird and maybe a little strange. I decided to protect it, to care for it. I fed it lots of good food. I worked with it. I played with it. But most of all, I gave it my attention. My idea grew, and so did my love for it. I built it a new house, one with an open roof where it could look up at the stars, a place where it would be safe to dream. I liked being with my idea. It made me feel more alive, like I could do anything. It encouraged me to think big, and then think bigger. It shared its secrets with me. It showed me how to walk on my hands, because it said, it's good to have the ability to see things differently. I couldn't imagine my life without it. Then one day, something amazing happened. My idea changed right before my very eyes. It spread its wings and took flight and burst into the sky. I don't know how to describe it, but it went from being here to being everywhere. It wasn't just part of me anymore. It was part of everything. And then I realized what you do with an idea. You change the world. Children are welcome to stay here for the rest of the service, but I am going to go out to the playground. If you would prefer to go and play out there, you may, but it's up to you. And you can come out later too, whenever you decide.
For those of you who haven't been here before, traditionally we sing the children out. So we had a natural, organic response to the absence of the song. Each month, we support a local nonprofit by sharing half of what's collected during our weekly offering. And this month, our offering outreach partner is Martin's Home. Martin's Home provides transitional housing for refugees and asylum seekers from many parts of the world, including Africa, Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and the Americas. Martin's Home provides a safe, welcoming space to stay while they await work papers, Social Security cards, and food stamps. Support for Martin's Home is consistent with the UU values of respecting the dignity and worth of each person and the need for justice and compassion. If you are watching this live on YouTube, please click on the big blue button in the bottom left-hand corner of your YouTube screen, or go to your website, go to our website and click on the Give button. It's at the top right of every page. Or you can send a text message to 73257 to receive a link to donate. It's 73257. And if you're in this joyous room, we're going to do a collection, as we traditionally do, while we listen to the offertory music, Honeysuckle at Dusk by Florence Price. Thank you for your generosity and support. These gifts help our church, our community, and our outreach partner make a true difference in the world. Now we turn to our ritual of Candles of Community, where we share joys and sorrows within the brave space of our church community. And after each candle is lit, please join me in saying, "We hold you in our hearts." The first candle we light is to keep in our thoughts and hearts all of those who've been affected by the impact of COVID-19. We light a candle of remembrance for the more than 3.7 million individuals who have died as a result of this virus. Join me, we hold you in our hearts. We light a candle of sorrow for the family of Robert Rim, who passed away in May. Robert joined our community after the pandemic began and has been active with the Green Sanctuary team. To Robert and his family, we hold you in our hearts. And in light of all the school ceremonies in recent weeks, we light a candle of congratulations and endurance in honor of all those who navigated educational milestones during a most peculiar year. To all the students, teachers, and their families, we hold you in our hearts. And we light a candle of celebration in honor of Ron D'Annunzio, our facilities coordinator. Ron and his wife Chris are the proud grandparents of their second set of grand twins. The arrival of Gia and Sophia makes 7 grandchildren for Ron and Chris. To Ron, Chris, and their families, we hold you in our hearts. And now let's hear from Libby.
Just arranging my footstool. 2 hymnals under each foot. Gets me to just the right height. Well, as a church and in our larger communities, we're in a time of finding our way. Coming back together, thinking about who we could be, who we should be. And we're in the middle of Pride Month, celebrating LGBTQ folks and allies. So for words of meditation this morning, I have this selection from the UUA anthology, Voices from the Margins, written by the Reverend Monica Cummings. Monica is an activist both in racial justice work and in support for the LGBTQ community, especially youth and young adults. So may her words open our minds and our hearts as we enter into this time of reflection. Dear unknown, unknowable, yet known by many names, keep us mindful that we are all related, that when one of us is ignored and treated with dis-ease, we all suffer. Today, let each of us commit to welcoming the stranger. Let us move beyond our comfort zones and connect with people labeled different and pushed to the edges of society. We can make a difference. We can transform lives. We can bring harmony and healing to the places and spaces where we live, work, and play. Let us keep our hearts and minds open and receptive to the still, small voice that calls us to stand witness for those who cannot stand, to speak the truth for justice for those without a voice, and to lead the way on the journey toward wholeness for those without sight. In the spirit of love, compassion, and community. May it be so. Let it be done. Blessed be. Hi. I have to say the speakers on my laptop do not do justice to Dr. Craig's playing, and it is very nice to hear it again live. And to see all of Dawn Starr's expressive and creative self as she leads our Time for All Ages, to meet Chris in the flesh after working with her several times, to be with all of you, whether you are here in this room today, whether you are watching us from your home or at some distance, whether you stumble across this by accident later in time, may you discover something here that is helpful to you. You know, I thought the words of the chalice lighting this morning could not have been more appropriate, and Dawn Starr even gestured to the windows as we heard, "Let us worship with the opening of all the windows of our being," and of course all the windows of our meeting room. And then there was that line, "We feed our eyes upon the mystery and revelation in each other's faces." Even if some of that mystery and revelation is largely hidden by the masks that we wear, still we are in the presence of one another's faces. For those of you who aren't in the room this morning, I hope you can share in some of the energy that folks are feeling here and enjoy the novelty of seeing this space with live bodies in it, as much as I have loved my one-on-one time with Jay Wiley. It's not the same as preaching to a whole room of you. I mean, he was my go-to social event through the whole pandemic. And I am grateful, but this is pretty special too. It was very odd to preach to an empty room, but I was really grateful you didn't have those cardboard cutouts like they had at the ballpark. Although, you know, you could have sold, it could have been an auction item, you know, your face on a body in the chair of your choice. So if we have to do this again, think about that. And I am really honored to be with you for this first hybrid service as we take the first steps toward working out the new normal of Sunday morning worship. You know, recently I was reading an article from the May issue of the Anabaptist World magazine. Some of you know I am a Mennonite in the other half of my life. Not a particularly orthodox one, as you might guess. The author of this piece, Jenny Gaiman, started by quoting some very familiar lines. "Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and I bet you all know where it goes from there. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again." Ms. Gaiman went on to reflect on the reality that we all go through experiences in our lives that leave us upended, broken apart, even shattered. And that nursery rhyme goes right to the question we all tend to ask: how can we put all the pieces back together again? Can we get things back to normal? Too often, she writes, all we want, all we can conceive of, is to be put back together the way we were before. We can't imagine anything else. But then she points out that we're often asking the wrong questions, whether we're talking about Humpty Dumpty or about our own lives. We can spend a lot of time and energy trying to glue all those pieces back together, but even when that's possible, it's not necessarily the best option. She quotes Father Richard Rohr, saying, "The promise of faith is that something will be born of the ruin, something so astoundingly better than the present moment, we cannot imagine it." And then she says, while that sounds terrifically hopeful, especially in a year of so much breaking apart, it also lays bare a present problem: lack of imagination. I think the challenge for all of us as we stand in this time between what has been and what will be, in this liminal space where we find ourselves, is to start imagining. And that requires looking honestly at what has been and thinking creatively about what could be. Certainly, the past 14 months have upended or even shattered our lives in countless ways, for some of us far more so than others. And many of us are struggling to figure out what life looks like now, what we can be comfortable with and what we can't, how to negotiate who is comfortable getting a hug and who is not. You may have experienced some of that awkwardness coming into the room this morning. And we need to have space to be in different places on those things as we move through this awkward time. We talk about getting back to normal as if that's a good thing. And there are parts of the old normal that would be great to get back. But I'm seeing more and more articles urging me to think carefully about what parts of the old normal I want back and what parts I don't want back. And I've begun thinking about that, both on an individual personal level and within the larger communities where much of our lives take place. Now, at first I thought thinking about it on a personal level would be very easy. Simple. Okay, yes, I really missed having the extended family come for the holidays, and I want that back. Well, yes and no. I really did miss it. I really did. But I did not miss the stress and anxiety of having anywhere from 6 to 10 extra people in my home for 3 solid days, which absolutely wipes me out every year. So yes, I want the family back, but maybe I want to think about ways to do it differently, that are more relaxing for me. And I just read an article in The Atlantic about commuting, how so many people who thought they hated their commutes found that they really missed the time for transition when they started working from home. Both physical transition and the psychological transition that the commute had provided from them. In so many areas of life, this is turning out to be less simple than I thought it was going to be. I certainly missed seeing people's smiles. Of course, I still miss it, but I can see the crinkles of your eyes. I missed hugging folks after church. On the other hand, I loved not having to feel guilty and make excuses when I didn't feel like doing something, when I wanted to stay home rather than go out, because who had a choice? I liked not having to worry about how my hair looked. Anything could look good straight from the front if you work on it hard enough, and I was doing almost all my professional work on Zoom, where I looked 10 years younger. I was actually able to make it through all of the worst of the awkward stages of growing out that very short pixie I had 14 months ago. I never could have done that without a pandemic. I've tried. I liked being so much less busy. I liked consuming less, shopping less, and realizing how little I actually needed. Now I realize everything that I have named reflects the privilege that I enjoy, being mostly retired and financially comfortable, able to stay home and safe, and having the resources I needed. So that's a huge caveat to all of that. For other people, the past year has been filled with much more difficult losses and challenges in every area of their lives. But I suspect that every one of us can identify things that we missed bitterly and long to reclaim just the way they were. And we can identify things about life before COVID that we did not miss during the pandemic and do not want back. And so now we face hard choices. What do we welcome back into our lives? What do we let go of altogether? And what do we need to transform into something new and different? It all calls for that imagination. Now, it's not easy to imagine new ways of doing things, especially right now because many of us are just really tired. Even those of us who've had an easy time of it, relatively speaking, through all of this, have had to navigate difficult decisions, emotional journeys, levels of anxiety that we weren't accustomed to. People who've had a more difficult time are not just tired, they're absolutely exhausted and depleted. We may be very aware of what we don't want back from our old normal, but it's harder to find the energy to envision what we would like to have take its place. But beginning that envisioning is the only way we'll be able to change things. Once we begin to imagine how things could be, we can begin to move forward towards something new and something better. Now, I realize that makes it sound really simple, and of course it's not. It's hard, and it can be really scary. It's a well-known fact of human nature that most of us resist change even when it's in our best interest, because change frightens us. And there's a reason why the phrase, "but we've always done it this way," has so much power. So that is why I love the story that Dawn Starr picked for us this morning. And I feel as though every time I throw a topic at her, she comes up with a story that becomes the text of my sermon. Because even when our imagination starts showing us new possibilities and we get these ideas, we're likely to resist them at first. And I felt such a surge of recognition in myself when the narrator of the story said, "I tried to act like everything was the same as before my idea showed up." Haven't you felt that way? You get an idea of how it could be better, and right away I start talking myself out of it. "Oh, no, I didn't really have that idea. I don't really want the challenge of dealing with that. It's really not so bad the way it is now." We worry about what other people will think. What were those phrases she had us say with her? You know, "That's a stupid idea, it will never work." We go through all of that. We worry that our lives might get turned upside down. But that leads us right to my favorite line from the whole story, and her daughter illustrated it so beautifully. When the narrator says how their idea showed them how to walk on their hands, because it said it's good to have the ability to see things differently. Maybe turning things upside down is an opportunity for a new perspective. Think about this service, this hybrid service that we're all sharing this morning. During the long stretch of purely virtual worship, some folks find it easier to come to church. Maybe because it's difficult for them to leave their homes. Maybe because they're just so much more comfortable in their pajamas. I know in my little Mennonite congregation, we had members who can't manage the trip to church joining us on Zoom from their care homes. People who had just had surgery or actually had COVID and could not have attended in person were with us virtually, getting the emotional and spiritual support they needed when they needed it most. Adult children of members who had attended when they were kids were joining us from other parts of the country. On the other hand, virtual worship left some of our folks completely out of the loop. They didn't have the technological skills, either the equipment or the ability to join those services, and they felt even more isolated without their church community than they had before. And while we were doing worship in the Zoom format, so we were seeing each other's faces, which was wonderful. In fact, one of our older members, who I think of as very traditional, actually said that she didn't think she ever wanted to go back to just sitting in the pews and looking at the back of everybody's heads. She said, "We have to find a way to do church differently. I want to see everybody's faces all the time." But it also highlighted for us things that really can only happen effectively in person, and to appreciate more deeply things we had taken for granted. For Mennonites, congregational singing with harmony is absolutely central to worship. Have you ever tried to sing with other people in real time on Zoom? And of course, we miss the hugs and the casual conversations, sometimes really important ones that happen so naturally and easily in person, but are almost impossible online. I'd be happy to keep most of our evening meetings on Zoom, especially in the wintertime. But on the other hand, yesterday I helped with the reception out of doors after a memorial service for a beloved church member, and I could not believe how much I had missed clearing tables and scrubbing coffee pots alongside my fellow church ladies. And it made me realize that it had been helping in the kitchen that had first allowed me to feel that I belonged in that congregation. And it felt so good to be back. And so we begin to use our imagination and dream up ideas and try not to discount them as being stupid or unworkable until we've played with them and given them a lot of attention. Why does it have to be either or for worship? Why not both and? Who are we trying to include? How do we welcome the largest possible range of people into our worship time, and what does that look like? what does worship really mean to us? What are we trying to do when we have worship? What does congregational life mean? How can we reimagine church so that it makes the most of all of our possibilities and meets the greatest number of needs? The questions are endless, and this is the time to be asking them. Chris sent me a transcript of an amazing interview between Brene Brown and Priya Parker. And while it was way too dense for me to process much of it for the purposes of this sermon, one line from Brene's introduction keeps ringing in my ears, although I am editing it very slightly to be family friendly. She said, in introducing what their conversation would be about, we're going to think about how we don't go back to doing some of the stuff that was not working, that we were just on autopilot doing, because that's what we thought we were supposed to do. Amen. Enough of that. These last 14 months have disabled our autopilot, for sure. This time has forced us to think about things differently. And while some of that has been intensely painful, some of it has been exciting. I love when the narrator in our story says about their idea, it made me feel more alive, like I could do anything. The key now is to give ourselves permission to experiment. Some ideas may seem kind of strange and fragile, like in the story. But if we give them the attention they're asking for, they could lead us to some really interesting places. Brene Brown has this concept she talks about being in bounce, being in the creative, messy part of thinking things through. It's like being in beta. If you're doing a beta test, you assume there are bugs. You're doing a beta test to find them and figure out how to work it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. Being in bounce is very unpredictable, but it's what allows the creativity that moves us forward and gets us to different ideas that just might work. But I think we have to be prepared for how hard all of this is going to be. Even harder in our larger communities than in our personal lives, because institutions, even more than individuals, resist change. Stephanie Spellers is an Episcopal priest, and she writes about change and growth in the church. And in her recent book, The Church Cracked Open, this is published in 2021, so it's timely, she writes, institutions and cultures are durable, partly because they obey the laws of inertia. Even if you think you have exerted a strong external push and knocked a moving object or an entire institution off its set course, wait. Just wait. With barely a nudge, the object will drift right back to its original path. Think of your own experience. When you see a crack, what's your first instinct? Push the pieces back together and patch it over. Eventually, a contractor comes with the bad news. There is deep damage here, and if you don't address it, before long the whole structure will be fundamentally compromised. You sigh and negotiate. And she concludes by saying, I don't know about you, but I have a surprising capacity to delude myself about how broken the structure is. With enough duct tape, I will get back to normal. It's Humpty Dumpty all over again. Like Jenny Gaiman, Spellers is pointing out that our instinct is to try to put things back the way they were. But she suggests instead that we find ways to welcome what she calls the unraveling, breaking, and cracking as a bearer of truth and even a gift. What have we seen unraveling, breaking, and cracking in our world, and what truths and gifts can we find there? The pandemic highlighted in inescapable ways many of the inequities of our society. The lack of support for necessary but grossly undervalued work, the brutal impact on communities of color, the increased burden on many working moms forced to choose between work and kids. The Black Lives Matter protest last summer brought growing awareness, even among white folks who had previously been in deep denial about it, that we have a deep and serious problem in this country with racism. There is so much that has been unraveling, breaking, and cracking. And when things crack, sometimes they crack open in a way that allows something new to come forth. Sometimes the old has to fall apart before the new can be born. Which brings me back to the article I quoted at the start of the sermon from Jenny Gaiman, who says, there is always the possibility that something new can be made of us, both individually and corporately. But we can't receive the new while longing for or clinging to the old. Now, Jenny Gaiman writes from a Christian perspective, and in her article she quotes Ronald Rolheiser in his book, The Holy Longing, where he makes a distinction between what he calls resuscitated life and what he calls resurrected life. Resuscitated life, he says, is when one is restored to one's former life and health. Resurrected life is not this. It is not the restoration of one's old life, but the reception of a radically new life. Our instinct, most of us, most of the time, is to seek resuscitation, not resurrection, to restore things back to the way they were. But that's not the path to transformation. That's going back, not forward. And while resuscitation may be good enough for some parts of our life, whether personal or communal, others call out for resurrection. The poet and activist Sonia Renee Taylor reminds us, we will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. Well, that sounds so beautiful and so hopeful. And it will take a lot of imagination and a lot of courage and a lot of welcoming those ideas. We will need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We will have to welcome new ideas and listen to voices that have not always been heard. We'll have to let go of some of the old before we know what the new is going to be. We'll have to accept that we can't receive the new while longing for or clinging to the old. Whether we look at our personal lives, our church community, or our wider society, we are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment. So may we be in beta, may we be in bounce, may we welcome the ideas and ask the questions, and have the courage and the creativity and the commitment to take the opportunity. Because in the words of civil rights activist and icon Rosa Parks, we are not where we want to be. We are not where we are going to be. But we are not where we were. And to help us commit to new visions, our closing hymn, which we actually get to sing together and then quickly leave the room, is in the Teal hymnal, We Are Building a New Way, number 1017. Words of benediction from the Reverend Leslie Takahashi Morris. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create. A deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a greater generosity of spirit, and a deeper joy in this life we share. May we have the courage and the imagination to make it so. And our coffee hour will be out of doors. So I invite us, do we have a postlude, Dr. Craig? No, then I invite us to continue in fellowship.